The podcast you're about to listen to may contain random lines from musical theater, terrible attempts at regional accents, and a sincere discussion about mental health. You have been warned. Are you ready to start singing with your feet? Formidable! Allez, c'est parti! Non, nous ne sommes pas fous, nous ne sommes pas ivres, nous sommes juste dans la joie. Une joie profonde, nos cœurs elle inonde. Cette joie, elle vient du ciel. Non, nous ne sommes pas fous.
Welcome to Sing With Your Feet. My name is Lily Field, and I'm going to be your fairy godmother for the next half hour or so. Last week, we started talking about one of my favorite topics. We started talking about, drumroll please, virtue. I gave you some homework, as you may remember. Your homework was to take a list of 101 virtues, which was a list compiled by myself and my philosopher husband over the last 15 years, which we believe are virtues which can contribute to living a happy, fulfilling, and hope-filled life. This week, we're going to chat with my philosopher husband about virtue because he has some knowledge that I think will make this subject a bit less dry and a little bit more enticing. Have you got your pocket protector and your nerd glasses? Because we are about to get geeky. I hope and pray to make virtue a subject palatable, nay, even desirable, nay, unquenchably exciting to you. That I need to even hope and pray that I can make this subject palatable is rather telling. I mean, talking about happiness and decluttering our closet, those are subjects that don't require much hope and prayer now, do they? But here we are, and I am doing both. This topic, the topic of virtue, is one that has been on my radar since 2004. And it's one that my husband and I have been talking about actively since 2007. But there's something strange about this topic. It's one that every single time I have gotten serious about studying it and talking about it, something unexpected has happened that has cut me off at the knees. Now, I'm not superstitious, and I'm not one who likes to spiritualize everything, but this particular topic seems to be one that something out there in the universe doesn't like it when I talk too much about it. And seriously, if you don't believe me, here is what happened to me this morning, the day I was supposed to be recording this episode. I have been doing a project with the students at my kids' school, taking raw wool and teaching them how to do things like card wool and spin wool, weave, and felt. And earlier this week, I had done a felting project with some of the kids. We are making little felted wool rose brooches for their moms for Mother's Day. Each of the kids brought a dish towel from home to use as part of the process. I used the dish towels then to hold together all the pieces of their project to store them until I had some time to sew the little brooch pins on the back. So I finished sewing the pins on the back, folded the little brooches back into the towel so that the kid could have it all back at the same time. All these neat little folded packages were lined up like little soldiers in this green grocer's folding tray. It looked so nice, and I was really pleased with the results. I was taking everything back to school this morning so that I wouldn't have to have these trays in my apartment over the weekend. It was raining this morning, but that wasn't a big deal. Everyone had a raincoat on, right? But as it was time to get out of the car at school, my youngest decided that he didn't want to get out of the car. And that's where the problem started. I didn't want to put the trays, which are rather large and unwieldy, back in the car because I had already taken some time and some trouble to get them out. So I put the grocer's tray, yes, on the hood of the car in order to coax my child out of his seat. So I helped the little guy out of the car, and then I hear him go, "Oh no." And that's when I watched in slow motion as the trays bounced off the ground and a dozen of those neatly little folded packages with dish towels around them landed in a gross, muddy puddle in the parking lot. And indeed, I said just a few choice words. Remember, we're talking about virtue today, and not later than an hour ago, I proved just how unvirtuous I can be by the steady stream of unpleasantries that escaped from my mouth. So I brought everything home, washed the dish towels, I ironed them to dry them, and now I've finally sat down to talk to you. But you see, it seems like there is always something that sneaks in to complicate my life so that I will stop thinking about virtue, so that I will just give up already. In 2007, it was a transatlantic move. In 2011, it was a new job. In 2015, it was a colicky baby. In 2022, it was, I don't even remember what it was in 2022, but it was something. And this year, I am absolutely determined to get serious and not let anything stop me from sharing my musings on this one topic that I really believe holds the power of life, death, and happiness. Now, with that out of the way, on with the show. I love stories about heroes, but I don't love superhero stories. I remember seeing the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man film like a million years ago, and I could have watched an entire 90 minutes of Peter Parker discovering the realities of his superpowers. I could have cared less about the Green Goblin or any kind of love triangle. What I really love are stories about real heroes, like Schindler's List, because of the quiet, heart-rending heroism of the titular Schindler. I've said it before, but I so highly esteem the Ukrainians who are bravely defending their sovereignty. I admire Zelensky and his allies. These real-life heroes are confronted with real-life decisions about living according to their values. And real-life heroes are the ones who choose, in the spite of the consequences, to do what is right, even when it's scary or hard or deadly. The climactic pinnacle of virtue is not found in heart-pounding action sequences of a Marvel movie, but rather in heart-rending moments of decision to do the hard, not necessarily exciting or glamorous thing. On TikTok, there's this thing. I guess you can call it a trend, but I'm not nearly cool enough to call anything a trend. It's a filter. It's this thing. When you look at it, you see your own image on the screen and you look like a cartoon character, like a Disney princess or a prince. A ton of people have been posting their videos with captions like, "Look at me, I'm the main character." I will confess to you, I have tried this trend, and there is something just so intriguing about seeing oneself portrayed as an adorable cartoon hero who blushes when she smiles. So what does this have to do with virtue? Well, there are some of us who love a good old-fashioned bad guy finds morals to become the hero of the story kind of story. And if we were honest about it, in the everyday story arc of our lives, we can often be the villain. So we have plenty of room to grow as the main character. We can be the bad guy who finds morals hero of the story. We aren't going from someone with purple or green skin to someone normal. No, there is very little external change. No fireworks, no celebratory racing across the finish line, no satisfying closure to the story. It is simply that virtue is its own reward. Some time ago on the podcast, your wicked stepsister and death doula extraordinaire, Lila Kelly, told us that one of the greatest regrets of dying people is that they did not live according to their values. By taking some time to think about what our values actually are and what virtues we want our lives to reflect, we are a step closer to figuring out how to not have regrets when we get to the ends of our lives. Plato, he wrote about his utopian Calopolis, in which the leaders were dedicated to simple living, complicated thinking, and faithfulness to their duty. These leaders were called the Philosopher Kings. Even this theoretical display of virtue has been criticized as a forerunner to some pretty dangerous political movements. So while I acknowledge that far more intelligent and well-informed people than I may have a point in their criticism, the idea of having political leaders who live simply, think hard, and are faithful to their duty is very much the kind of world that I would like to live in. So here is my question. Can someone, just your regular, everyday, run-of-the-mill denizen of the 21st century, be a philosopher king? Perhaps not a king, no, but each of us within our own sphere of influence can rule over our lives in such a way as to live simply, think hard, and be faithful. While the idea of virtue is bone dry and boring, the reality of seeking virtue can lead to a colorful, emotion-rich, action-filled life. failure inevitably happens and important lessons result. This, in the great big story of life, is called character development. But as I said earlier, we need somebody who is quite a bit more intelligent than I to help us think through some of these things. So I will be right back with my very special guest. I am pleased to bring into our conversation today my indulgent husband, Charming Fields. Hello, Sherry.
Hi.
So, Sherry, this week our goal is to persuade my Cinderellas that the study of virtue and hopefully the active pursuit of virtue is something that will measurably improve their quality of life and increase their experience of everyday happiness. I know that you have a bit of a weakness for etymology. Could you tell us where the word virtue comes from?
Yes, the word virtue comes from the Latin word virtus. And before we get to discover what the word virtus means, I'd like to point out that the word virility comes from the same root, namely the Latin vir. Vir means man, and virility refers to manly vigor, masculinity, or manhood.
Oh, now that's fascinating. So wait. Are we to conclude that the words virtue and virility are etymologically related?
They are. Virtus refers to manliness, but manliness in the sense of bravery, courage, and also moral strength. A Roman soldier had to be strong and courageous before going into battle. The reference to manliness and virility may be uncomfortable, but there seems to be evidence that shows that there were women serving in the Roman army, which goes to show that someone's virility or manliness was not related to their sex, but to their courage and moral strength, independent of sex.
Oh, now I'm loving it that you've included women in your explanation, because honestly, I had no idea there were women in the Roman army. And now I want to know more about these courageous and disciplined women. But I digress. The notion of virility is no longer associated with virtue. So what happened?
Well, the meaning of a word changes over time depending on how it's being used. That's what happened with the word virtus, or virtue. If the word originally meant manly courage, especially at war, it quickly grew into taking on a much broader meaning. The Romans called such moral dispositions as temperance, prudence, justice, and courage cardinal virtues, drawing from the ancient Greek word arete, which means excellence. To Plato or Aristotle, temperance, prudence, justice, courage were essential moral dispositions to anyone striving for excellence and therefore happiness. I found out that there is a word in Sanskrit that's close to virtue. It's the word vira, meaning hero.
Oh, now I am a fan of that comparison. From the earliest days of this podcast, I have said that we are the hero of our own stories. And that is definitely the theme of today's episode. We are heroes when we decide to face our difficulties and lean on wisdom. So, hey, Sherry, you're a real hero.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I'm totally ready to accept that. Allow me, though, to get back to the Greek word arete.
Go on.
If the word virtus is a word rarely used to qualify a woman, even less a child or a slave, the Greek word arete is used to qualify the excellence of someone or something.
So it applies to men and women alike?
Yes, and not only does it apply to anyone, man or woman, but it also applies to things as well.
Can you expand on that?
Well, let's take the example of a musical instrument, a violin, or a viola.
But why not? Yes.
You play it. Don't we say of someone who plays the violin or the viola very well that he is a virtuoso?
Indeed.
The instrument, in and of itself, has no virtue. What makes it excellent is the care with which it was made, the material that was used to make it, and the way it is being played. A man...
Or a woman.
Yeah, absolutely. A man or a woman is not excellent or virtuous but he or she becomes excellent or virtuous by acting in a certain way.
Okay, now what does that mean exactly?
Well, remember I referred earlier to Plato and Aristotle? Mm-hmm. In their eyes, temperance, prudence, justice, courage were virtues. To Marcus Aurelius, an emperor, and, incidentally, a Stoic philosopher, man has a destiny and must work at fulfilling it. If bees, says Marcus Aurelius, fulfill their destiny by cleaning and protecting the beehive and getting food out in the field, a man or a woman fulfills his destiny by living in such a way as to be prudent, just, courageous, and self-control, among other virtues. We must work at being virtuous.
So he or she is then excellent and therefore worthy of being called a hero.
Well put.
So to summarize, what makes someone excellent are his or her human and moral qualities, right?
Exactly. We measure the excellence of a tree by the fruit it bears. In the same way, we measure the excellence of a person by the fruit she or he bears. Beware of the looks. A tree may look beautiful but bear no fruit, or worse, bear toxic and poisonous fruit. In the same way, a person may look great, but behind the looks there is a heart full of jealousy, envy, greed, and so on. We may have wealth and status. These do not define excellence or virtue. But what springs from the heart does. The way I treat others, the way I act, especially within the confines of my home.
Is that so?
Or at work. Am I self-control? Am I just? Am I courageous? Am I loving? Do I celebrate the success of others? I'd say that when we clothe ourselves with these qualities or virtues, we become excellent. We become true heroes. We fulfill our destiny. We become complete and therefore happy. Often, we are lost in the puzzle of our own life. With that image in mind, we could say that virtues are the edge pieces of this puzzle, giving it its shape.
But yes, but that's totally what I've been saying. I love the image of the puzzle. It's something we've talked about repeatedly on the podcast. I like to say that the virtues are the edge and corner pieces that contain the rest of our lives. So if we try to make a puzzle without those edge pieces, we can get scattered all over the place and we don't know where to start. With the edge pieces, it's like we have an outline.
That's right. May I say something else?
Please do.
The most excellent of violins, or violas, may not always sound great. We will fail. I fail at being excellent every single day. I do not always bear good fruit. We won't always be excellent, but the edge pieces are there. We have, as you say, the outline, and we can, no matter how incomplete we feel, or unworthy, or unloving, go back to the outline. Let us not give up on being heroes.
Let's shake on it. Now, I've already admitted that I am by far not particularly virtuous, but I believe that the pursuit of virtue, no matter what our starting point, can be an adventure, with all its highs and its lows, successes and failures. It's about character development, with authenticity, curiosity, and humor. Well, Sherry, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We may be calling you back to help us look at some of these topics as we go forward. Is that okay?
It would be my pleasure.
All right. Have a great day, Sherry.
Thank you.
Elle me fait bondir et vibrer, crier. Elle me donne envie de chanter, danser. Elle pousse à agir, donner, partager. Et tout simplement de sourire, aimer.
By now, you have listened to episode 55, in which I argued that the topic of virtue is one that none of us should try to escape. When we die, people will remember us, not for what we did, but for who we were. The list of 101 virtues, as I mentioned, is a list that my husband and I have been compiling on and off for the last 15 years. The virtues have all kinds of origins. One of those origins is definitely the Bible. Honesty, faithfulness, love. These are biblical virtues, but not exclusively so, obviously. A person doesn't have to read the Bible to agree that honesty and faithfulness are a really important part of living in society. It just happened that when we sat down to start compiling our list of virtues, we started with the desirable character traits that are mentioned in the Bible. There are also philosophical virtues, character traits written about as desirable in the philosophical literature. There's an overlap in many of the philosophical and biblical virtues: diligence, learning, lucidity, industriousness, wisdom, and justice can be found in both. I'll spare you the pain of listening to me read the list of all the virtues that fall into both categories, well, at least for now. Now, just to complicate things further, we realized that there were virtues which we considered desirable, but were not handily quotable in the Bible or by a philosopher. For example, I'll take availability. We considered availability to be a virtue. We defined it as having the physical, emotional, and psychological bandwidth for being present to another person. Availability is a psychological state first and foremost, which has a visible, practical application of, for example, putting down your telephone. Quite obviously, this is not found in the Bible nor in the philosophical record, unless there was some time-traveling Stoic that I don't know about, but we'll talk about the Stoics another time. So, like I said, there are other virtues too which don't fall neatly into the categories of biblical or philosophical. For example, humor, which I consider to be tremendously life-giving as a virtue, or teamwork, which my indulgent husband considers to be an essential virtue to living a happy life. So what we discovered is that in addition to the already robust, non-exhaustive list of biblical and philosophical principles, there are more modern notions which we, a philosopher and his humble fairy godmother wife, consider to be virtues. We consider them to be desirable character traits that, when pursued, will contribute to leading a happy life. So, last week, you did your homework, I'm sure. You graded yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 on all 101 of those virtues. I'll put the link again to the list in the show notes in case you haven't gotten around to it yet. Obviously, grading yourself isn't easy. The grades you gave yourself are idiosyncratic. They're going to be related to what you understand the word to mean and to your own experience. The grades are going to be influenced by your self-esteem and by your tendency to see the glass half full or half empty. The grades weren't there to tell you if you were a virtuous person or not. Let's be honest, the very moment we decide that we have reached the status of being virtuous, something like a grocer's crate full of precious little wool crafts will fall suddenly into a muddy puddle in the parking lot and knock us off the pedestal to humble us and keep us from glorifying ourselves. No, the grades were there to help us see the greater puzzle of our lives more clearly. We're going to talk about what those grades mean, and they don't always mean what we think they will. There are the good grades. Let's say, for example, those you gave yourself a 7, 8, 9, or 10. Those are the pieces of the puzzle that are already in place. You probably didn't have to think too much about your answers for those, but we'll talk about those in a few minutes. The bad grades, the ones for which you gave yourself a 0, a 1, a 2, or a 3, they can represent several different things. For example, it can be an area of your life in which you're consciously struggling. Or it could be a character trait that just doesn't describe you at all, and you know it, and you probably could do better, but it wouldn't just mean a lot to do all that much work. And lastly, those bad notes could represent virtues that you could not care less about having in your life. The ones for which you saw the word and you were like, who cares about efficiency? Or temperance? What a fuddy-duddy old-fashioned word. And therefore, you graded yourself according to the importance that that virtue had in your life. If you were at all lucid, those bad grades are not surprises either. Here again, you probably didn't have to think very hard to grade those. I mean, given my outburst this morning, I can say that temperance and acceptance are not my strongest points, and I don't need help from anyone to point that out. So after the good grades and the bad grades, there are the average grades. Let's say the ones that are 4s, 5s, or 6s. These are the ones that can be very telling if you're willing to go digging around. In this category are the virtues which might have spoken to you, but in which you find yourself neither excellent nor awful. Among those that speak to you, you might find some of your daily irritations or dissatisfactions. Maybe these are areas in which you have long known that you need to work on yourself. If this is the case, it shouldn't be a surprise either to find those there. You're aware of the struggle, which means that you have a desire to be better in these areas. You want to see this part of your puzzle more clearly, but it's hard. The virtues that are part of this middle ground of average grades and that don't really speak to you are, right now, probably not at all that important for you. You know that you aren't perfect in these areas, but you're chugging along. Maybe one day you want to improve on this, but for today, you're okay. It's interesting to go back over our average grades and determine which ones we would put in the category as they speak to us and those that do not speak to us. So here we have 3 categories: good grades, bad grades, and average grades, but I'd like to add a 4th element for consideration. I like to call these virtues the virtues that make my scalp itch. The grade that you gave yourself for this virtue doesn't matter. It can be very good, very bad, or very average. What it is it's a virtue which solicits a reaction in you. Whatever it is, this word makes you a little bit uncomfortable. These virtues that make my scalp itch can point to a sensitive spot in my past, for example. It might awaken feelings of anger or sadness or hypocrisy. With these words can come waves of different kinds of feelings, maybe rebellion or resistance, or even a form of fatality. It is critically important to take note of these words. To get to the bottom of what produces the discomfort from some of these words, you might need to get some professional help, a counselor, a psychologist. The very visceral reaction to some of these words can be revelatory, and they can help you move forward. So I want you to get the help that you need. So remember last week when I went on and on and on about how studying virtue is like color theory? This exercise of determining how we react on first blush to the different virtues is like asking the question, do I like this color? It's as simple as that. Color evokes feelings. We like a color or we hate a color. Color evokes memories, and so do virtues. It's not necessarily, do I like this virtue? No. But when a word as simple as honesty or faithfulness causes our hackles to raise, I think it's safe to assume that there's something about that concept that is what we understand the concept to mean that rubs us the wrong way. On the other hand, there are probably words on that list of virtues that are going to evoke something pleasant. Maybe the word resourcefulness, that makes you think of your grandfather who could make something out of nothing. Or hospitality, which reminds you of a neighbor who always made the very best brownies in the world. So this week, I want you to go back over your pages of the virtue quiz and determine the categories of these virtues: your good grades, your bad grades, and your average grades. Within your average grades, I want you to consider if those average grades are ones that speak to you, or if they're just there without having any particular feeling attached to them. And lastly, I want you to take note of those words that make your skin crawl, and maybe, if you're willing to, start digging into why. What particular situation arises to the surface when you think about it? So here's the part of the podcast in which I catch you up on how I am living out my New Year's resolution this year, which was to live out the golden rule in as many ways as possible. Back in February, I crossed paths with a neighbor. When I asked her how she was doing, she said, "Not well," which, whether I am in a hurry or not, is not the kind of thing I could just walk away from. So I learned that she was starting chemotherapy the next day. I barely know this neighbor, but as far as I knew, she very much lives alone. So I offered to help her out if she needed it, but I was secretly hoping that she wouldn't ask. Side note, remember, I have already told you that I am not always very virtuous, so please don't be shocked with my candor on this. She didn't ask, and several weeks went by. I thought about her often, and finally, I was out and about in town with my youngest, and we saw that there was this florist selling tulips on the central plaza of town, so we bought a bunch, and we took them up to my neighbor. I'll admit, I don't think she has all of her faculties, something I have kind of noticed when I talked to her previously. She kind of freaked out my kid by the way she talks, and I sensed that this lady rarely ever had a visitor, so she really wanted to talk. So I sent my son upstairs, and I stayed to chit-chat with her. Golden rule, right. I mean, I didn't hate being there, but it wasn't my favorite activity all month either. That said, I know that in that moment, I lived out the golden rule, and at the very least, I would love that someone popped by with a bouquet of seasonal flowers for me. So if only for that, the golden rule rules. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. There won't be a new episode in your feed the week after Easter. Still, you'll have a little extra time to work on your quiz and examine your good, your bad, and your average grades, as well as the ones that make your skin crawl on your scalp itch. That is while my family and I take a little vacation. I want to give a great big thank you to 7 Productions here in Mulhouse, France for the use of the song La Joie as the intro and outro of the show, to Claude Ekwe who wrote it and Matt Kugler who sang it. Matt's new album Aventura is available on all the music platforms and it's really, really fantastic. You should give it a listen. This is your fairy godmother signing off. Just remember, it is never too late to start singing with your feet.